Going back to where we left off this morning, this valuable Luna has had a life of its own. And I know the photographs are totally inadequate to convey what has been emerging there over the last 5 or 6 years, and emerging in a seasonal way. And our staff is very, very small, and everybody's part-time. And so it's been a very slow process. And perhaps that's as it should have been, because we were groping our way. It's almost like we had to discover each insight through this dark period of searching and letting go of everything that was familiar and secure and understandable. So it has really been a gentle, quiet unfolding, but not easy at all. Those gardens that I showed you have gone through an enormous process of evolution. And they have all been planted out of the methodology, the agricultural methodology of Rudolf Steiner. It's called biodynamic farming. And I'm not sure how familiar some of you are with it, but for me, it has become the most spiritually based, reverential way of entering into the cultivation of food. It's this meeting of the human and the natural world in a mutuality, because the plants, the seeds, the history they bear they unfold themselves to us. And then we learn from them, and whatever ways we participate in bringing them into the garden is out of a larger context of understanding how plants especially grow within the relationship of Earth to Sun, Moon, and the other planets. Rudolf Steiner was a genius, and he understood that matter was spirit before any of it could be proven. So, in a nutshell, it is a strong commitment to the belief that Earth grows food and not farmers. And the whole evolution of, especially since the industrial era, of the mechanization and the enforced presence of humans in the natural world, in soil and in seeds, has been a tremendous threat to the earth and stress to the whole of the natural world, everywhere. Agriculture is not some romantic idealization of whatever we idealize it into. The way Earth grows food, and did so for eons before humans ever emerged, was incredibly beautiful, and it was good for the whole community of life. There was very little starvation of animals, birds, fish, insects, plants, before humans showed up. So the primary community of life, the original community of life, had worked out over eons, trial and error, of how ecosystems could evolve as communities with everybody being fed. And we're just barely beginning to understand the dynamics under that. And these dynamics are not, for the most part, taught in our land-grant universities or any of our agricultural schools. And the closest method, philosophical approach to farming that I have discovered in my experience is biodynamics. And if that philosophy of farming could prevail in these times, everywhere on the planet, it would be a very different story on so many levels. But Rudolf Steiner was not easy to understand, and it has taken all the years since his death, after he gave this course on agriculture, for his followers to plant out and experiment with his ideas. So it's a living school of working with his insights, which he received in an esoteric way. He was a visionary, but he was also a scientist, and he believed, as Thomas Aquinas did, that if there is an inner vision of something, it ought to be compatible with reason and rationality. And that's what Thomas Berry means by critical reflection. You have to bring together story, shared dream experience. And biodynamics comes closer than anything I've experienced in my life to that. So our CSA has been practicing that approach we're in our 28th year with the CSA. But taking those understandings and making them available for people to do in their backyard is a translation that has to go from one scale to another. And that's what we're experimenting with. And we're all learning as we go. There's a woman in her 50s who showed up here one day out of the blue, and she somehow is now the coordinator of these gardens. And that's how it happens. People show up and it happens. The second thing about those gardens, they are a mixture of vegetables, foods to be eaten, herbs for cooking, flowers for beauty, and then the understanding of the relationships between the plants helps the human person who's in the garden to understand how profound that is and how little we grasp it. And so it's a deeply therapeutic and enlightening experience to garden that way. So trying to make that accessible for anybody who would like to have a part to play in their food. And it's in the light of climate change and escalating food prices and the crisis in fossil fuel, because we cannot keep importing food from all over the planet. And I don't know about you in Kentucky or Colorado where you are, but in New Jersey, the demand growing among more educated people about the dangers of the industrial food supply and their desire for good, clean, healthy food for their children, the demand far exceeds the supply. Because we're losing farmers all over. You think nuns are old, you should talk about farmers. It's a crisis. Yeah. And so it's going to affect everybody, and we're not prepared for it. We're not even getting prepared for it. So the other thing I wanted to say about those gardens, that all the seeds we use are so-called open pollinated, meaning they haven't been hybridized, and they go back in their genetic memory for a very, very long time, and they have adjusted to different places, and therefore have their own immunities and their own strengths. So heirloom seeds or open pollinated seeds are critical to save and plant out in these times, because the corporate seed companies, especially Monsanto, DuPont, Delta, they're trying to buy up the seed stock of the planet, learn the sequence in the genetics of the plant, and then patent that as a life patent. And this is outrageous, and you can't solve it inside the mindset of Western civilization. I mean, people get outraged because they know intuitively there's something wrong. And all polls show people don't want genetically engineered food. But Monsanto and the way of thinking that still comes out of the West to feed the hungry, to advance technology, all of that still plays a major role in influencing both the corporate and political leaders. So saving seed now is a sacred act. And we've got to save as much open pollinated seed as we can and protect it from the contamination coming through wind and pollen drift from plants that have already been genetically engineered. And New Jersey's surrounded, our farm is surrounded by GMO fields of corn and soybeans. It's everywhere. So this is a crisis. And 2.5 weeks ago, when the DARK Act was passed by Congress and signed into law by the Senate, it was devastating. Most people were on vacation. It's so hard to keep up because this industrial mindset and control over is like a many-faceted hydra. It just has so, you put one down and 3 more come up. So there's no rest in trying to protect Earth from the threat of the corporate takeover of the planet out of a cosmology that thinks it's right and is totally inconsistent with the way things work. So you can't curtail that kind of energy because it's pathological. Because it's grounded in a belief system that thinks it's right. So just to say that, you know, those gardens are they're very radical, subversive gardens. And it has to come down to the individual family level to be able to participate in understanding the miracle of seeds, the mystery of seeds, and how our generation now has to protect that before it's too late. So I just wanted to say that. And then I was talking just a little bit about the ritual site where we now celebrate 8 seasonal passages in the year. And that has sort of become these 8 points where we stop and we try to realign ourselves with what the land and all the creatures are doing on the Valley of Luna. 8 times a year. It's this time out. And we're trying to pay attention to what the natural world is doing. So the equinoxes and solstices are familiar to us. They're the major seasonal changes. But the cross quarters in between, which have long, long traditions, especially in the Gaelic cultures, old Gaelic cultures, they're more subtle. They're very significant because Earth changes in subtle ways in this seasonal passage around sun. And it isn't just in the outer world, it's also in the inner world of humans who are trying to reinvent ourselves as part of the other species in the community. What do these things mean for us archetypically? So that it's part of the inner journey. It's part of the spirituality we're trying to develop because, and I guess I never said this, but you know, Genesis Farm is not a Catholic center. Most people wouldn't even know there are nuns that run it or that Catholic, it has Catholic origin. We don't hide that, but it's not, we are open to people of goodwill. That's how we say it. Who want to join us in the search for about these questions, all the questions about the planet, where we're going, what's happening. So, so in a way, evolving a spirituality that honors all of the Earth's religions. We are deeply committed to ecumenism, and those of us who are Christian are deeply committed to Christianity, but opened up, not in the literal historic fundamentalist meaning of the words in those texts. Those stories are archetypal. And they can be opened up to reveal patterns of meaning that have their source actually in the patterns of dynamics that are in the universe and the whole earth. We're just catching on in the human aspect of them. And we're trying to recover that memory of how to do that, how to be that. So that's the sort of spiritual practice that we're struggling to be faithful to, but we don't know what we're doing. And so these 8 passage times are considered like a liturgical calendar. So we call that calendar the calendar of Earth, and it's those seasonal, that's real. What's happening is real in the outer world. Our paper calendars on the wall that we all have to sign in for and, put all our notes on and stuff, that's calendar too, but it is a human abstraction, and it's based on ideas and meanings we carry in our heads and psyches. And some of them are lined up with the Earth calendar and some aren't. And some of them are manufactured by commercial interests. And we know that commercialization of all meaning is starting, it's just eroding the soul, the whole culture. Nothing's sacred. Everything's packaged for sale. So we're trying to have a foot in both calendars, but mostly the foot in the Earth calendar. That's what we're calling recovery from sickness. So I just wanted to say that little bit about the ritual, because for us, it's very important that is routine. So we have finished 3 complete cycles of all the 8 passages, and we meet every morning and do the body prayer in the 4 directions. That's how we pray. And the prayer is to evoke inside ourselves the desire and the capacity to be in alignment with everything Earth is doing and how it wants to go on and keep living, and how we can be a part of that. That's our desire. And Thomas Merton once said, the desire to pray is prayer. We're not looking for intervention. We're looking to change ourselves and be in alignment with what's already there, that the divine mystery infused into everything. So that was just how I wanted to transition now into, maybe we could show the next slide. It's the calendar, it's the Earth calendar. So that's simply a symbol. There's many, many resources you can go to online and pull out these 8 passages. So we'll go to the next slide, please. And that's what we use as our sun pole. And that's usually at the center of our circle in which we do all of our ritual prayer. And that was at the end of the winter solstice ritual that we did. Okay, now I'm going to shift gears, because the work we've been doing on the Valley of Luna had so many multiple levels of meaning that when we try to write interpretive guides that a person could pick up a pamphlet or put an app in Walk, we realized that you could go through the valley in an hour, or you could go through the valley in 6 months. There were that many different meaning systems. And suddenly the whole Valley of Luna was not a walk, it became a pilgrimage. And we started to think in terms of pilgrimage. What do pilgrims do? They set out on a journey of discovery of themselves and discovery of deeper mystery wherever they're journeying to. And pilgrimage it's an archetype, and it's in every culture. All cultures have understood this sense of journeying into discovery, exploring and discovering, and that it's a critical human need. So the Valley of Luna is becoming a pilgrimage, and we're still trying to write the text because it's so complex. And We just don't have the people to. It's slow. You know, we just can't get it where it should have been finished 2 years ago, and it's not. But in the process, we also kept looking at those aerial views and looking down at all the open farmland and all the looking down at these fields and realizing, like in this picture, I don't know how well you can see that or how big it is, but you can see in this watershed, which is a river very, very close to us and dear to my heart because I grew up on this river. And it's filled with all kinds of farm fields looking up, and almost all of them are in GMO crops. And as we kept looking, there's no one's growing grains, no one's growing wheat, staff of life, and organic wheat, forget it. There's no organic wheat growing anywhere in the northern part of New Jersey. We're one of the most populated states in the Union. So the towns and population centers along that river route in that watershed, they're all getting their food flown in or trucked in or trained in from other regions of the country. And here's our land growing commodity crops to be shipped out and go somewhere else. And it's insane. It's like, this is insanity. And all the nicest people are involved. So with a lot of conversations and discussions with people in the region who we've known for many years and concerned about things, we really started to coalesce and start talking about how can we recover the watershed, the Musconetcong River. It's so gorgeous. And it took we've done a lot of study, the geology of the region, the story of the river, the lakes. And I'm just going to get up from my seat and put something on the chair here. I don't even know if you can see this, but if you let me know if you can.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yes.
That's a larger map of our bioregion. And the darker green is the Musconetcong River watershed, but it's in a water basin that's larger than that. And here's Genesis Farm. We're not in that watershed, we're in the Fallonskill River watershed, but we're in this water basin. This is the Delaware River, which goes all the way down to the Atlantic Ocean. And this is the Musconetcong River, which flows into the Delaware. To the north of here, okay, see this? This is New Jersey. This is New Jersey. This is this. And this is the Musconetcong River. This is Genesis Farm. But up here is the Appalachian Mountains. And down here, separating New Jersey from Pennsylvania, which is over here, is the Delaware. And over here is the Hudson River. So we're between the Hudson and the Delaware River, both of which were gifts of the Wisconsin Glacier, which receded 15,000 years ago, and gave us the most unbelievable water basin, the purest, plentiful, abundant water that has given life to this bioregion. So this water basin is Earth's, this is the legacy of life. We had nothing to do with creating it. Yet, in 500 years of our European presence, that whole water basin has been contaminated. It's mind-boggling. And this goes back to a question I heard earlier from the person who asked about patriarchy. One of the major things that began in this basin when the Dutch and the Swedes came in 500 years ago was the mining of ore in order to create the artillery for the Revolutionary War. And in 1893, Picatinny Arsenal, which is one of the world's supermarket shopping places for any weapon you can possibly think of, founded itself around the headwaters of the Musconetcong River. And it's a Superfund site. And because it's military, they don't have to even tell you where their sites are, where they've discharged toxins and burned artillery and chemicals. And so here is this water basin of such generous abundance being contaminated by our need to go to war. And we know America's number one. It's our number one balance of payments is weapons. I don't know if you read Chris Hedges. He's a very progressive journalist and wonderful Pulitzer Prize writer, but he wrote a book called War is What Gives Us Meaning. And he has served on war fronts for years. And he is one of the most honest and searing in his honesty to bring transparency to the lies that have been perpetuated over American history, US history, European US history. So as we look at these pictures of the watershed, we're saying, oh my gosh, like how do we even begin to recover? And there's a wonderful saying by Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry is also a great hero for many, many reasons. But he says, you know, there are no unsacred places. There's only sacred places and desecrated places. So what comes out of the evolutionary process is utterly sacred. And the desecration is not because we mean to desecrate it, it's because our meaning systems are so distorted. So as a number of us were meeting about the fact that you can't get any organic wheat, and we're importing all of our food, and all this land is going to export, and who's talking about it, or who's, you know, so we decided we would start having conversations with people up and down the river. And we talked to bakers and we said, where do you get your flour from? And they weren't getting them from any local mills. And we went to the millers and we said, why aren't you milling flour from New Jersey? And they said, because there's no wheat for human consumption. All the only things we mill now are animal feed. And so you can't get, there's no wheat and there's no organic wheat. So then we started talking to farmers about, is it possible we could start really transitioning some of your fields from GMO corn to organic wheat in the big picture? And just had lots of conversations. For about 2 years, we had conversations. And then, next picture, please. This past February, we invited about, I don't even know how many people who we had been talking to, and they were talking to other people. And we had an event in February to bring together anyone who wanted to talk about restoring the Musconetcong River Valley. And we wanted to give it a spiritual as well as an agricultural restoration, because you can't restore fields unless you restore them, the heart and soul of the people who are the human community. So 40 people showed up. We were blown away. And out of that, a steering committee has formed, and we have working groups that are now working with both the spiritual and the farming aspect of it. And they've kind of self-organized into working groups. So we took the notion of pilgrimage, and a whole group of people said, you know, if we had a pilgrimage from the headwaters of the river to its mouth, and instead of just having bike tours or bike rides or rails to trails, we have all that stuff. But what if this became a pilgrimage route? Something like the Camino de Santiago in Spain. That's been there for 1,000 years. I thought I had that. Yeah. So we bought a bunch of copies of Martin Sheehan's The Way.
Oh, good.
Wonderful, wonderful story, wonderful, wonderful. And if you watch this enough times, you begin to see levels of meaning. Different, you see a whole slew of meanings. And so the idea is to bring together people who want to help map out the root. And the root will only be a healing root. So part of it is going to be ritual. And we have already completed 1.5 years of rituals along the river, where we have placed into the river gifts, saying to the spirit of the Lenape people, the native people who live there, that we're sorry, that we are coming to say to you, the dead, we are sorry, we were absolutely wrong in what we did to you. You were violated. And please take our apology as sincere and help us. Help us with your spirit to recover common sense inside ourselves. And then we give gifts to the river and say to the river, we're sorry for damming you up, for letting all kinds of toxins come into you, for killing the fish, for, we just have ritual and we make them up. And people are starting to get comfortable just making it up. It's wonderful because it's in us. So if it's always got to be the certain leader in the faith tradition who does the travel between the worlds of God and people, then ordinary people don't realize that they can do that too. So we have completed a number of rituals all along the river, and we have a mapping committee now working out what the route will be. In the meantime, we have talked to millers and bakers and growers, and there's a whole new community of farmers who are committing to transitioning their fields into the growing of organic wheat.
Wow.
It's going to take them 3 years to be able to be certified for that, but they're doing it. Not a lot. Because something's coming, it's sparking something in people who know at some level that what's going on is wrong, but they have no way to, who do you tell that to? Where do you go with that, So it's providing that sort of an opportunity. This is a restored Lenape village at a park, a restored village along the Musconetcong River. And we have done a number of rituals at this Lenape place. And this is a replica of one of their sacred prayer circles. So that's where we gather and have had 2 rituals so far in that place. Okay, next slide is just another picture of the river. And then the next slide is an overview. It should say Picatinny Arsenal, okay? And outlined in yellow around the headwaters of the river, which is now a lake, the largest freshwater lake in New Jersey, Lake Hopatcong. That is Picatinny Arsenal. It's 6,500 acres in New Jersey along this water basin. 1,500 laboratories experimenting on new weapon systems and chemicals, and it's just a nightmare. And it is the 3rd largest employer in the region. So its economic impact on the local community for jobs and families is enormous. So extricating ourselves out of this way of thinking as part of the patriarchy and the war making is not a simple process. It cuts across so many levels of meaning. So we have done rituals there, and but we're not ending with that. We want somebody on our committee is studying the endocrine disrupting chemicals that we can identify as part of the waste sites, and then using the work of Theo Colburn in her scientific discovery of endocrine disrupting, mimicking chemicals. We're going to keep putting that out into the public, because this is what is destroying life. It's mimicking hormones, and other species are not coming to full term in their reproductive process. And it's happening in humans. We're all part of it. Okay, next slide is of the Musconetcong River Watershed Association. A bunch of volunteers really working long and hard at water testing and monitoring and building a love for the river up and down with the people. Okay, next picture. I talked this morning about Frederick Frank, the artist. Well, I wanted to say that that was a beautiful photograph of Pachem in Terrace, this stone mill restored by Frederick Frank. Mm-hmm. And it is the northernmost part of our pilgrimage. So we did a ritual there last spring, and now we have gone all the way down the whole river to the end, to a place at the very tip of the Musconetcong when it goes into the Delaware River. And this is Villa Milagro, and this is owned by a couple who came here about 20 years ago to establish a vineyard. And so they grow wine, and we have done a number of rituals on their land, and now they are converting. So I want to go to the next one. And you should see some corn in the background and like grasses in the foreground. Is that there?
Yes.
Okay. And so that's Villa Milagro's land, and the corn is GMO, because that's what they used to do. They lease their farm out to another farmer, and he grows GMO corn and soybeans up and down the valley. He's got about 20 farms that he works on, because in the whole valley there is one intensive animal feed plot. It's a chicken factory. It's a Japanese corporation that owns it, and they will buy any feed any farmer will give them. And that's why so many of those farms are feeding that capo, that chicken factory, torture chamber. Yes. So Bob, the farmer who planted that GMO corn, the owner of the vineyard, who's on our committee now, had a long talk with him and convinced him to take 5 acres and put it into organic wheat. So what you see growing was the beginning of that conversion process. And as of 2 weeks ago, the wheat was harvested and threshed and put into barns. The first real harvest of the beginning of this dream. So that's the pilgrimage, that's the Musconetcong River. And it really came out of the work in the Valley of Luna, but at a different scale, the scale of a watershed. Because watersheds are manageable scales for communities to work together. In most instances, you can know almost all of the actors, the institutions in a watershed, because it defines your bioregion up close. Not everyone, not everywhere, but in many instances. And so that's how we're now thinking about, it's just a Luna on steroids, you know, it's on another level. So what we do in one, we'll take to the next. And trying to document the process as we move along, so that there's a history and it can be simply put together in some sort of a form and given away to others, because every watershed is the watershed, is Earth's. Every place is the place that is sacred. And we're not in control. We don't want to be at the center of this. We're just experimenting and learning and giving it away. Okay, now this has led to another level of meaning that's come out of the Valley of Luna in this new part of our work. And that is going into this notion of addiction even deeper. So the next slide, please. You may or may not recognize this woman, but her name is Ann Wilson Schaaf.
Oh my goodness.
She's older now. She's still out there talking. And the next slide is a copy of one of her most famous books, When Society Becomes an Addict. And this book was very, very important to us in the years when we were doing our programs. Because we would talk about Earth as self-healing. We would also talk about addiction, human addiction, and not just in substance abuse, which it is, but addicted to the institutions which promote that kind of dependency. So in the great work, Thomas Berry talks about the 4 major institutions, which are actually in substance abuse language, you could say they're the dealers. They get everybody addicted. They don't mean to do that, but that's what happens. And then the behavior inside them contributes towards the destruction of the planet and people and communities. And it's not intended. It's just happening because of the beliefs underneath it. It's an addictive belief system that we're in charge. It's all about us. So he talks about the 4 major institutions: government, the economic institutions, the educational institutions, and the religious institutions. And the reason they are dysfunctional and addictive is because at their foundation, they are committed to the belief that the human is separate from the other than human world. That's the illness. The source of all the illness. It cuts the human off on every level, from Earth and Earth's capacity to be the source of all the life that we're living. So Ann Wilson Schaaf, in a way, was talking about this in the 90s when she wrote about it. And when Thomas described, it's just like the two of them are fusing now, and it's so clear. And how, if a person, so there is a rehabilitation center right here in our town. It's right across the river. And it's called the LEN Lodge. And we've known it for years. We've known the founder of it, and a number of people, like in their transition back into life, would come here to volunteer. They'd be sent here to do stuff. And so we've known them. And then it sort of has just become clearer and clearer that when you examine the 12 steps, which can take a person who's alcoholic and dry them out and get them on their feet, and then give them, in this case, it takes a year to get somebody really detoxified and sober. And then they go to a halfway house, and the 12 steps becomes the pattern of their life, and it is a beautiful spirituality system. But it too doesn't include the whole sacred story. So when you give your life over to a higher power, the higher power isn't in the natural world, it's not in the universe, it's still in the context of the Judeo-Christian worldview. And so the next slide is a slide of Carl Jung. And we can go back and forth between the two of these. The next one is Bill Wilson, who is the founder of AA. And he and Carl Jung were friends. And Jung shared a lot of his insights about the self and the emptiness of the self if it is separated from the natural world. But it wasn't clear enough or articulate enough in those days. He died in 62, I think, or 63, to see it the way we can see it now. That to give a person the sense of themselves is to say, now, you, Jesse, are universe become earth, become Jesse, and you are filled with that whole mystery. And no one can tell you because of the color of your skin or your economic status or this, that, or the other thing, that you're less than what's perceived to be success. If that can be built in, and if the divine can be approached, the higher power can be approached in all existence, then there's a completely different recovery process. It includes all the steps, but more. There's an addition that can be given to the 12 steps that opens it up into a new phase. So we have been in conversation with the administration at Alina Lodge. I think that's the next slide. It's a facility just across the river from us, about bringing Universe Story into their year's residency program. And then in the 6 month or 5 month halfway transition period, that they in transition might come over to Genesis Farm, so close, and work in the gardens in this way, work with the trees in the orchard with these understandings, work with the stream and the water with these understandings. And that perhaps with that and the clear and good scientific story of how things have come to be spiritually as well as physically, that may open out and expand the meaning of recovery and the 12 steps. And to learn how to cook the food and rebuild nourishment in that way, and take part in the rituals and the season of changes and realign with how Earth is. So we approached the administration with that idea and found incredible openness. So in September, we're meeting with the staff of the halfway house and working out the program. So that wouldn't have been possible without this stark searching in the chrysalis for what we might be called in the next phase of the mission of the farm. So the next slide kind of says it all. And that is, maybe the work we're doing is going back to the book, Saving Paradise. It's restoring paradise one watershed at a time. And it's not ours, it's everyone. Everyone in every place is in a watershed. How can we all bring the idea of paradise is here at the level of the watershed, our farms, our water system, our energy system. Now, having said energy, those warm seeds and grasses you saw us planting, they can be pelletized into grass pellets and burned, and they have no carbon emissions. The straw that comes, or the stems of the wheat that will be grown up and down the valley, can become a source of baled straw, and baled straw can be used to build houses. Best insulation on the planet. We've been working with straw bale houses since 1990 and demonstrating how we can have composting toilets and solar heating and grass pellets. Brings another economic phase to the pilgrimage route, to the valley. So there's a lot of education, obviously, lots got to happen. We're just beginning that process. But it opens the possibility for changing things into another direction, out of the sense of the sacred. So anyway, that's what I want to share about what our experience has been and is. We don't have anything written yet. We're far behind on just about everything, except the work we've done on the land. Yeah, real. So, you know, okay, here's one of the last things. I'm always saying the last thing, but I have such a fire about the possibility of religious congregations playing a major role in laying the foundations for this new kind of thinking. Because as we age and our institutions age, and we're not going to be there and all of that, the most, besides our charism, and I'm not even sure always about that, the most important thing we can do is put our lands into preservation so that they will not be threatened by development or taken over by anyone that does not abide by these deeper understandings that we have come to understand. And the need for farmland now has never been greater, because so much of the farmland of this country has been poisoned. It's not just the GMOs, it's the atrazine, it's the Roundup, it's all those chemicals that have been used for decades and have drenched the soils, the water table, the food, the microbes, the worms. We can become an oasis of lands that are committed to farming as though the earth is doing the farming, and protecting and making sure that nothing happens to them, so that a new generation of young people, and the young people wanting to come into agriculture is unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. I've been in this work for 36 years out here. They cannot afford land. They can't afford the infrastructures. And the other part of that is our buildings can be universities, agricultural universities, if we change the curriculum and take it back to the wise farmers who still are old enough to remember how to do it right. And you're going to find them in the organic farming movement and the biodynamic. Be very careful of county agents. They're nice people, but they've been educated in the old paradigm. So, and most of them in their gut know it. They don't want to hurt, but they're hurting. They're hurting the land, and they're hurting farming. It's a belief system. So that would be the last thing I would say. And I'm so grateful that my congregation back in 1991 gave me permission to pursue putting our land into trust here, sell the development rights. And by 1997, we had gone through the whole application process, which took a couple of years in the state of New Jersey. And then the state retired our development rights. And as soon as that happened, someone gave us 86 more acres, and we put that into open space protection. So this entire land cannot be touched or developed or changed from the purpose for which we have it now. And our CSA has trained scores of young people who now are out there running their own farms, but they can't get land. And our congregational lands should be walled off, metaphorically, so that nothing else happens except that we encourage the new generation to be able to farm it with truthfulness, and then help shelter them, because homes are just so out of the range of young families. But if our lands are held in trust and they have no development value, appraisal value, then we can make out arrangements however we want to provide that. Because at the end of this whole conversation, I think what's really at heart is questioning whether there's any validity to humans believing they can own land. But we need to change that thinking and bring everybody to the table who owns the land. That means the raccoons, the trees, the bear, the fox, the deer. Everybody has a point of view. Everyone has a need for the land. So if we go around the table and get everybody's opinion, It's going to put us in our place. We're wacko. Okay, so why don't you turn to your neighbor, or maybe in a group of three, but no more than that, please, and just share what's stirring inside you from all this, and the possibilities that you feel are very real in terms of Loretto.